After the success of Metropolis 2, Scenes from a Memory, it was actually kind of fitting that their next album was originally what the last album kind of intended to be, Falling into Infinity. It wasn't originally intended to be a double disc, 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. No, it really wasn't. But now that there has been a little bit more in the way of success, and there was a little bit less in the way of restraint or control, there was a lot more that was able to be done by the band. So whenever 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence came out in early 2002, fans were very pleased to see that they had 2 new discs of Dream Theater material as opposed to just 1. Now, as I said before, it was really not intended originally to be a 2-disc set. It was something where the title track, 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence, started with just a simple overture that you hear, track 1 on disc number 2. And going from that, the band themselves, especially John Petrucci and Mike Portnoy, were able to write parts to an entire suite, one that would last longer than 40 minutes, become the longest Dream Theater song in existence, which is something that still stands true to this day, and by far be one of its most explorative and really very emotional pieces whenever it comes to really the subject matter at hand. And really 10 years later, in fact 11 years now, it's 2013, it's really kind of strange to see how all of the different ideas and the different diseases that were presented with this number 2 have really become focused into the public eye at a very rapid rate. This is something where it was a part of our culture, but in the post 9/11 world, these are elements and these are mental illnesses that have become a lot more of a focal point in our culture. But this is completely and totally alienating disc number 1, what originally was penned as the disc that we are speaking about today. 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence is a strange beast. It's strange in the fact that there are 6 tracks, and for a long time a lot of people believed that those were the 6 degrees, but in reality the 6 degrees are all spoken about on disc number 2. These are 6 songs that each speak about varying and different ideas, and there are a number of things that are begun on this album and a number of things also that are continued on this album. There's a meta-album, actually, among Dream Theater lore, and that actually is partially begun on this album. It ended with the last and final note on Metropolis 2, Scenes from a Memory, and picks right back up with the next note that starts the very first track off of 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. The first track is also the beginning of the infamous 12-step suite, which was written by Mike Portnoy, which was describing his time within the 12-step program. After the Metropolis 2 tour, he had determined that his alcohol abuse and other abuses had really gone to a extreme level, to the point where he was drinking earlier and earlier in the day, had become addicted at various points in time to cocaine and other prescription drugs, and it just cut into the point where he needed help. So he entered the 12-step program and eventually wrote the 12-step suite, which really is at its furious pace right now with The Glass Prison. It really opens up very, very strong. In fact, there was a huge influence from Pantera, considering he and, I believe, John Petrucci had checked out a show from Pantera prior to penning the track. And there is definitely a lot of raw fury in this. This is definitely one of the heavier, if not the heaviest at the time, Dream Theater songs that you're going to hear, and there is a lot of influence. But that's the strange thing about this album. The influences are countless. In fact, it's very strange whenever you consider the brevity of everything. You have something as aggressive as you heard with The Glass Prison, with a Pantera / Megadeth influence, but then you hear on tracks such as Misunderstood or Disappear real elements of a very Radiohead type of sound, something that's a little bit more explorative. In fact, on Disappear, you actually hear a technique that was first implemented or originated by George Harrison, where the solo riff was written by John Petrucci, then he reversed it and learned how to play it reversed, only to reverse it again, and there's your final product. That's the reason why this sounds so incredibly disjointed whenever you listen to it, and this actually adds a degree of genuinity to the song, and it really gives it something that's very individualistic, not to mention it also really adds the uniqueness. I also really love the uniqueness of Disappear. It's just so, it's very, very sad. It's all about death, and it has just a very, very somber tone to it, almost as though they are whisking somebody away into the other side, and the tone behind it, the very, sorrowful, mournful, somber tone that the song really is able to emanate is one that can really bring out a lot of personal emotions in us all. Now, for those of you who have followed me not only on the channel but also personally on Facebook and things like that, you know that I've experienced a great deal of loss this year with my uncle's tragic suicide. I also had another uncle who actually just a couple of days really after this album was put out, died suddenly of a heart attack. And why this is important is because the song Disappear really just emanates all the more and became kind of almost a mourner's anthem for me. However, whenever you go to disc number 2 and you consider tracks such as War Inside My Head, where they're talking about ideas such as post-traumatic stress syndrome for Vietnam vets. Both of my uncles were Vietnam veterans. So you can see where really the undertones are there. Not to mention there's another track on there, The Test That Stumped Them All, which is all about schizophrenia, which my uncle who just passed this year was a victim of as well. So this is definitely one that as time has kind of aged it, it's also become etched in my mind as kind of a quintessential and important piece, considering the real impact and the real experience that I've had with some of these different ailments, not personally 100%, however, the ideas and topics of schizophrenia, of post-traumatic stress, of bipolar disorder, of, suicide, death, this is all things that for a lot of us are very, topical and something that we have a lot of experience with. However, to have an experience with multiple items on that list to a huge degree really just adds to just the real importance and power to this album. Now, I'm really getting off topic there, but still on disc 1 we also have topics about stem cell research, and we still have also topics about blind faith, which is all about religion. And these are also two things that have come into question even further as time has progressed. The stem cell research idea, of course, became sort of an abandoned idea after the attacks on the Twin Towers on 9/11/2001. However, the blind faith idea is something that still really resonates to this day and has only kind of furthered itself. And it's kind of interesting to hear some of the lyrics in these tracks, knowing that Dream Theater as a band have considered themselves to be religious individuals to a certain degree. So this is definitely a great explorative, twin pieces of work. And overall, the music on this is just phenomenal. I mean, this is one thing where I have to really compliment the fact that they were able to take the momentum from Scenes from a Memory and really transfer all of that kind of creativity and kind of expand their horizons even more on these albums. I mean, there's just so much freshness here. You would almost think that with the way in which everything was so individually plotted out for Metropolis 2 that this would kind of be a little bit more of a collective band piece where you would see, shines here and there. It would be something that seems a little bit more along the lines of conventionality. That is not something that happened whatsoever. There are certain moments where you really hear John shine. There's a lot of moments where, on the first disc especially, where Jordan just is absolutely going crazy on the keys. I really, really like that part. He has a real focal influence on this album. I really like Mike's drums on this, and James's voice just continues to just flow beautifully. And of course, you can't discount the bass work of John Young. He is just one of those constant fixtures to this band. And that really, I think, sometimes goes underappreciated, even though he is definitely extremely talented in what he does, and proves it once again on this album, dealing with some real complex signatures. And this is one where disc 2 really factors into that a lot, because this suite really just sort of blends everything together. You have this as itself, as a concept album, would have been released and would immediately be considered one of the more important pieces of early concept music in the 2000s, considering its just first off, the subject matter alone would really grant it that expectation, not to mention that title. However, also you get a lot of what Dream Theater and what concept pieces really should be kind of revolved around. You have multiple pieces to the puzzle that all fit together and all seem to come together. You have representations musically, representations lyrically. This is not something where everything sounds flat, and where everything seems like you have to kind of read along with it at home, almost like it's some sort of book on tape or something like that. It definitely doesn't have that feel to it. And really, whenever you get into the topics and whenever you get into it musically, it's such a mixed bag of goodness that you really have to marvel at this. And this is a band that just got off of writing a hugely influential concept album. To have them essentially do that again in a disc 2 form, you know, really being the center point of this album, presented by itself on its own disc, you just have to marvel at the role that Dream Theater was really on at this point in time, considering this was something that was built from the ground up, from an overture that just presented more and more ideas that really got us into talking a lot about syndromes such as Asperger's, that talked about bipolar disorder, post-traumatic stress, talking about autism, speaking directly about schizophrenia, and really bringing it all together along with a little bit more. And you know, you just have to marvel at it. There's just a lot of different, you know, factors going on here. Really, aside from Metropolis 2, this is right up there as one of my favorite Dream Theater discs. I told this story on Facebook, but I'll tell it to you guys since not all of you are a member of the group or know me personally on Facebook. But I remember whenever I got this album, I was listening to it on a car ride with my family. We were going to the mountains that were very close by here, to a local resort, just to kind of explore it. You know, it's not something we got a chance to do all the time, so we figured we would take the moment, since it was halfway decent outside, to make the trek. It started snowing on the way up there, and as this music was playing and as everything was going on, this was just one of those things where you could not remove my focus. You couldn't remove it at all until we finally reached our destination, which, strangely enough, and this is something I remember to this day, was the moment that the very final notes of 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence really finished up, which, oddly enough, are the first couple of notes on their follow-up release, which we'll talk about next time, Train of Thought. And the minute that I walked out of the car, the minute that I stepped and hit the ground, I was changed. It was something that brought a lot of awareness to me. It brought a lot of questions, and it really brought a lot of just marveling at the musical abilities of these gentlemen. And not to mention the way in which they were able to make me focus on music that, for some individuals, in fact for a lot of conventional society, deem as far too complex, something that they can't get into, something that just seems above their heads. They were really able on this album to bring it down to a very base level, still present some really difficult arguments and some really difficult pieces of music for people to digest. And these are all things that people don't necessarily want whenever they listen to music. That's something that needs to be really said. This is not something that everybody wants to hear or wants to listen to, these topics. Whenever they listen to music, they want something that's going to bring them joy, not necessarily something that is going to bring them perhaps to the depths of depression. This is an album that brought forth so much awareness, that brought forth so much in the way of unconventional thought, and really just asked the hard questions while also presenting just tremendous music. And they were able to do so in an hour and a half. It was a tremendous experience, and upon re-listening to this album for the umpteenth time, in preparation for this review, I felt that same transfixed ideology. I felt myself glued to the seat that you right now see me sitting in while listening to this. The only thing that was different was that, due to the past 11 years of my life, and due to what has affected me personally throughout that time frame, some ideas really do have an elevated significance, and some concepts that were spoken about are just brought to an even more realistic light, considering on that night 11 years ago, a lot of these elements were not items that I knew much about, either that or things that I had experienced readily. But man, how 11 years have really changed things for me. But nothing has really changed for this album. It still continues to be a magnificent work of genius. It still continues to be one of Dream Theater's best albums in my book. Probably number 2, unless you count EPs, in which case it comes in at number 3 behind A Change of Seasons and Metropolis 2, Scenes from a Memory. Just brilliant work. If this is your first time hearing of this band, I encourage you to listen to this album. It's very easy to get a hold of. If this is something where you have heard this before but haven't listened to it in quite some time, today's the day. Today's the day to go back and listen to it again. And think about how 11 years, or however long it's been since your first listen of this album, how that time has really changed you, and how this album now can change you because of that time really flowing forward. That's all I have. I will talk to you guys next time, because next time we have a train to catch. That was the lamest thing I could say right there.